My history with racing games have been hit and miss. Now sure, I love the Formula 1 titles, and last year's Hot Wheels Unleashed was a release that completely blew all of my expectations, but when the world and my mates played and loved Forza Horizon 5, I dragged out my cockpit and set myself up to this new entry in the series, and then I had to ask my friends what in the world were they smoking and if they could please stop, because that racing game was completely unplayable with a steering wheel.
Oh shit! Oh my god!
So when Codemasters, the developers behind my beloved Formula 1 series, release another grid game, I was a bit worried. Last time I pulled out my racing cockpit for a game that wasn't Formula 1, I was instantly disappointed. On top of that too, the last grid game I played was pitched as a realistic game where they got Mr. Eyebrows Fernando Alonso to help with the handling of the game.
Sebastian Vettel, and there's locking up in a crash, and Fernando Alonso goes over the top there of Charles Leclerc's Sauber.
And I didn't enjoy that game to say the least. But Grid Legends, damn, this hits different. Grid Legends is obviously the latest release by Codemasters and EA Games, and rather than the simulator stylings of Formula 1 or the open world of Forza, Grid Legends feels a bit more like Need for Speed Pro Street, just a touch. Grid Legends, which I'll just call from Grid from here on out, is obviously a racing game, but also doesn't focus down the path of one particular form of racing. You can race the iconic McLaren M8D around the Indianapolis Speedway, old school classic Mini Coopers around the Red Bull Ring, or in sheer case of fucking stupidity, the Renault R25 around Bathurst. And it sort of immediately answered my question on why we've never seen a Formula 1 go around Bathurst. Before I even booted up Grid though, I pulled out my cockpit, and when I launched the game for the first time, you're dropped straight into a race. It's just like when you boot up Forza Horizon 5 for the first time and you dropped out of a plane, but here, you've witnessed a giant crash and it's up to you to basically finish the race. Though sadly it's not like Talladega Nights where the drivers get out of the car and race on foot. But the main question you'd have with Grid is, well, how was the driving? For starters, I haven't played Grid Legends with a controller, nor will I. I run a Thrustmaster TSXW steering wheel setup with a Thrustmaster shifter, a pair of IMB racing gloves, and I use the standard Sparco wheel that comes with the Thrustmaster base, and as soon as I was dropped into the race, I immediately felt gripped on the road and secure, until I tried to turn and my wheel dropped out because I didn't tighten the wheelbase mount correctly on my cockpit.
We can't quit. Understood. 22. Finished.
Oh, the wheel one.
But once I tightened that up, honestly, I was having a damn blast with Grid using a steering wheel. This is what I was looking for when playing Forza Horizon 5. My car felt fast and I felt in full control of the car too, zipping between shipping containers and shootout elimination race, driving a Volkswagen Beetle around a corner power sliding, trying not to crash into a wall while it's raining during Bathurst. It's exactly what I wanted. Racing feels both arcade fun with it being able to simply pick up and play, but it does have a bit of the sim aspect to it at the same time. You can toggle what kind of transmission you want to use, whether it's automatic, sequential shifting, which is the flappy paddles at the back of the steering wheel, or individual gears if you have a shifter. Driving a super fast modern sports car, I was using the paddles, but when driving a classic muscle car, you better believe I had one hand on the shifter at all times. You can obviously turn off traction control on the racing line too to make it of course harder. But one of the great selling points, if you ask me, besides the overall fun, is the damage. In the first race you witness a pretty gnarly crash, but graphically the crashes look dope, and I hope we get some crash graphics updates in the next Formula 1 title, but damage can be cosmetic or, well, not. Each car feels unique to drive, but again in an arcadey style of fun way. Now the R25 Formula 1 car does not feel like you're driving a Formula 1 car, just as a heads up, but you can tell the difference between an old muscle car slamming around street circuits to, say, racing a truck that literally flips if you brake it too hard.
Just like your mum.
A little heavy over there.
That's one thing Grid Legends does really damn well, and it's obviously the racing, but each car feels unique and different. The first time I drove a racing truck over jumps, not only was the music fading out as I was getting some air and slamming back in when I hit the ground, but each car handles differently. But the best of all, and it had me in damn stitches, was doing my first electric race. And, well, it explains itself.
Go!
But using my Thrustmaster TSXW setup, it felt smooth, natural, and was a damn blast. I've previously used this setup for both my Formula 1 2021 and Forza reviews, and obviously, Codemasters nailed this because they've gotten it right from the Formula 1 titles, and Playground Games, you need to take some notes on this. I thought there'd be more of a learning curve too when playing a new racing game with a wheel, but the only thing I really needed to learn was the turning circle for each vehicle, as I was used to the tight turning of a Formula 1 car. But getting into a muscle car or even an old school Mini using a steering wheel and a shifter felt incredible. Races 2 also feel a little action-based, if that makes sense. The music during the story mode of the game feels like it's been pulled out of an action film. There's crashes in the game that happens between the AI where a douchebag driver clips a wall and knocks other drivers out. Or you'll be driving along in second place and you'll see the AI just push a little too hard to get away from you and they spin out and lose control of the car. And of course it doesn't happen in every race, but when you do see it, it's kinda cool. Now there is a story mode here and the cutscenes are real people, which again sort of surprised me and was cool to see, but when you start off Grid you have interviews with drivers and well they interview about a giant crash caused by a giant douchebag who refuses to believe why it's his fault. But in all honesty, I skipped past basically all of these cutscenes to jump straight into the racing because the racing was that fun. I didn't care for the story, I just wanted to start racing again. Each race in the main story too felt a little bit like the Breaking Point mode in Formula 1 2021, where you'd have certain objectives like you need to finish past a certain point or you need to beat a rival in the race. Speaking of rivals, there is a cool system when racing. Now as this isn't Formula 1, your car can take some damage and there's more bumping and grinding here than in my bedroom, but ramming into cars isn't an instant game over. But instead if you race forward and forget to brake like you may forget to do if you're looking down at the shifter wondering what gear you're in, which is something I totally didn't do. But if you ram into a car, whether it's forgetting to brake or trying to overtake them, if you hit them too hard with enough force, that driver in the race will become a rival and fight back against you with the same ferocity that you hit them with. So if you play dirty when racing, the AI will do the same if you damage them, which is a cool mechanic if you ask me, because it only takes one moment to go from first to last because of the AI. The AI in some instances too will cause their own crashes and you'll need to navigate around them. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll have the AI push too hard and slam into a wall or something, which feels cool and cinematic, but they'll also collect other AI drivers, and it's even cooler when it looks like a scene out of Blues Brothers. And of course, skilled drivers can swerve out of the way to avoid cars, or they can slam right through them and get a heap of new AI rivals for that particular race. Now there is multiplayer here in Grid Legends, and I didn't get to check it out sadly with my other mates who are also doing a review of Grid Legends, but thankfully the game does have crossplay. So not only is it great that should you want to race with friends on another platform you can, but hopefully we'll get this and maybe VR support into future Codemaster titles. But while I had fun racing and playing Grid Legends, I found personally there wasn't much of a reason to keep returning to it. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm glad you didn't ask. In Formula 1, as you slowly start to get better at the game, you slowly take assists off and you practice tracks over and over to get a feel for them. But unlike Battlefront 2, you actually get a sense of achievement when you make personal lap record times. And it's even better when you've worked hard and the practice pays off and you beat your friends.
Well done, mate.
Bravo,
Well done.
bravo.
But I didn't find myself wanting to return to Grid, but when I fired it up, I was enjoying it. That's not necessarily a problem with Grid itself, but it's a personal problem that I had. And it's the same thing I had with, say, Uncharted 4. Uncharted 4 is a great game, but for most of the time I couldn't be bothered booting up the game, but when I did, I was loving it. The gameplay itself too did feel a bit arcadey, and not as much as the previous Grid game, which is great, but it did feel a little bit like a Need for Speed style game with a bit of professional racing skin over the top, and it felt a little awkward. There's a large variety of cars here in Grid, and there are some decent tracks too. When racing on a proper racetrack, it felt like a racing game like Gran Turismo or the traditional Forza games. But when you're on some street circuits and have fans hanging over the side of the barricade, it felt like Need for Speed Pro Street. Another small thing I wasn't overly a fan was, well, gear shifting. For certain cars I wanted to use paddle shifters, and also for cars that went over 8th gear as the Thrustmaster shifter only goes to 7th gear. But if you want to use the shifter for certain cars, you need to go into the settings of the game, change the transmission from sequential gears to individual gears. And if you want to use pedal shifters, you need to go back into the menu and then change it back. And it got kind of annoying in the campaign when at one moment you'd be racing a classic muscle car, and then the next race you'd be racing a modern sports car, and I constantly was going into the menu to change over these settings. Finally, while you can race in electric cars and they're fast and it's kind of funny with the game sound design, it did feel a bit like I was playing Mario Kart with a boost system. Now you see, there are little check flag markers to drive through using the electric cars that are off the racing line, so it's slower to go out of the racing line to go through them. But if you go through both checkpoint markers, you'll gain a boost, which works a bit like the red mushrooms from Mario Kart. Press the button once and you use one boost, but hold the button down and you use all the boost available to you. And this is when I sat in my cockpit wondering what kind of game was I playing. Sometimes it felt like a smooth, fun racing game, and at other times it felt like it wanted to be an arcade game, and it just felt a bit out of place. Other than that though, Grid Legends was fun to play, especially with a steering wheel. While I didn't overly care for the cutscenes in the main campaign like I would in a Formula 1 title, the racing is fun, and like one of my mates put it, Grid Legends feels like Codemasters having a bit of fun making a racing game, taking time away from the hard work and simulation they put into the Formula 1 games. If you are a racing fan, I think you'll enjoy Grid Legends, and if you're not a fan of grid or racing games, if your mates ask for you to give it a crack while you're at their place having a couple of beers, I actually still think you'll enjoy it.